Okay, welcome everyone. And today we've got a very special guest, and that's Patrick Holford. Patrick is a bestseller author from the UK, and I've known about him since, the 1990s, before I started studying nutritional therapy. So Patrick's got a new book out called The Flu Fighters, which is a very nicely timed publication, given everything that's going on. And, you know, last webinar that we hosted was on immunity. And some would say, well, maybe we should be moving on to another topic by now. But with everything that's going on and everything that's been drawn out, I'm hopeful that general public are becoming more aware than ever that our general health is important to support our immunity. And then we can actually do something to protect ourselves and keep ourselves healthy. So with that, I'll pass over to Patrick, who's going to go through a few slides. He's warned me he'll talk deeply and quickly, so we'll let him run with that. But I have said if there's any burning questions during his presentation, just pop them in the chat box and I'll see if I can interrupt him and get that answered. But otherwise, I've said for him to aim for 40 or 45 minutes presentation, and then we'll have sort of 10, 15 minutes at the end to do some Q&A. So over to you, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Ian. I'm looking forward to visiting South Africa because I haven't been for many, many years. And yes, very often the question you ask is answered in the next slide. That's generally the way it happens. And I want to say that, you know, in relation to any virus, and obviously we're talking about Corona and COVID particularly now, there's two things. One is how to not get it, you know, outside protection. That's what masks and social distancing is about. And then also how to boost your own natural innate immune response. And that's what vaccines and vitamins is about. And that's what I'm going to focus on, how to boost your own natural response. I'm just going to share my screen so we can get into this presentation. Here we go. So here we go. So yes, my story really starts back in the early 1980s when I met this extraordinary man, Dr. Linus Pauling. And Dr. Linus Pauling, I've dedicated the book to him, and I'm going to read you that dedication. This book is dedicated to the memory, intelligence, and humanity of Dr. Linus Pauling, 1901 to 1994, one of the greatest scientific minds of all time, who Albert Einstein called a real genius, the only person ever to win 2 unshared Nobel Prizes. He also had 48 PhDs. Linus Pauling dedicated the last 39 years of his life to the science of nutrition and vitamin C, and suffered 39 years of unfounded abuse and denigration, and continues to do so from the ill-informed, ill-advised, poorly educated medical pharmaceutical community, who in so doing have deprived humanity of one of the most extraordinary, cheap, and non-toxic medicines. This has to stop. This man is the originator of really modern chemistry, molecular biology. Even he identified the way that a gene causes disease, nearly got the Nobel Prize for the structure of DNA. There's a whole story about that. And he also even showed how the environment affects genetic expression, which is epigenetics. I mean, total genius, that's the bottom line. And in the 1970s, he wrote a book called Vitamin C and the Common Cold and Flu. And on the cover of the book, it said in 1976 to 77, when another swine flu epidemic is expected, it is especially important that everyone know that he can protect himself to a considerable extent against the disease and its consequences by the use of this important nutrient, vitamin C. And what have we done? We have ignored it. Your immune system includes your skin, it includes your lungs, it includes your digestive tract, but it's particularly strong in the lymphatic vessels. And that's why when you're under infection, you may feel sore under the armpit or in the groin or in the neck area. And we make special white blood cells, not red blood cells, but white cells, which contain all sorts of interesting nutrients that attack viruses, like T cells, And macrophages. Macrophages are a little bit like vacuum cleaners. Here you see a macrophage attacking and gobbling up some bacteria. So it's really quite extraordinary how our body works. And you make 2,000 immune cells every single second. And your ability to make those immune cells depends upon your nutrition. Now, the book Flu Fighters, I wrote in the first 2 weeks of lockdown here, so it's very, very much up to date. And there is a website to support it. And there is a free chapter 9 that anyone can download called Surviving Respiratory Distress, because this can save lives. Now, when you're talking about a virus, and this is a diagram of a virus, it's actually got two spikes. One is called hemagglutinin, and this allows the virus to get into cells. And it's blocked by vitamin C and also black elderberry, actually. And then there's another spike called neuraminidase, which helps viruses to get out of cells, and that's blocked by vitamin C. There are, for example, neuraminidase inhibitor drugs. Tamiflu is an example. Now, when you have a virus, what happens is along comes your own body's T cells, which then attack the virus. And then, hang on a second, there we go, macrophages. We then also produce or have macrophages, which in effect gobble up these viruses. And I should point out, this is not a diagram of a virus. This is viruses infect cells. So what your body is attacking is virally infected cells. Now, yeah, here we go. So what happens is between the viruses and our immune cells, there is warfare. And this really uses and creates a lot of oxidants. Think of them as the harmful byproducts of generating oxygen. And this process uses up selenium and vitamin C. So we know that vitamin C and zinc and vitamin D help to boost the number and the function of T cells and macrophages, and selenium also helps in this process. When a cell becomes infected, it produces interferon, or rather it's our body produces interferon within an infected cell. And that interferon production is boosted by vitamin C. So vitamin C is required for interferon production. So however you look at immunity, you can see very clearly that nutrition is involved. Now, this particular coronavirus, SARS-2, also quite specifically attacks hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the thing that makes your blood red. It's a carrier of oxygen. It's an exquisite protein with a wonderful shape that carries oxygen and requires iron in order to do so. And what happens with this virus is that it invades the hemoglobin molecule, and it knocks out iron. And then you get what's called free iron. And iron oxidizes very rapidly. It's also, we hear of free heme, because it's heme within the hemoglobin. And that's why you get lung damage and capillary damage, blood vessel damage, and also blood clotting. So if we look at it from the sharp end and work backwards, you get all this extra iron, this unstable oxidant sets up a big chain reaction, a bit like rust. Your liver produces an iron carrier called ferritin, desperately trying to grab all this dangerous loose iron. Cells, especially without vitamin C, can't make enough nitric oxide. And that is a tremendously important substance for circulation in the cardiovascular system. I mean, Viagra, as an example, boosts nitric oxide and circulation. The lungs are not working so well. The supply of blood, of oxygen through the red blood cells, not so good. So oxygen levels start to plummet, and that's why people need respiratory support. And eventually, because this virus takes about a week in the respiratory tract, then a week in the lungs. And if you don't clear it, you may enter the final stage, by which time I hope you're in hospital, where the immune system goes haywire and it triggers what's called a cytokine storm, like a hyper overreaction. It's like a fire, that needs to be under control. And if that fire keeps raging, that is literally what kills people. Not the virus, but a cytokine storm. And that's exactly what you see in sepsis. Sepsis is usually caused by a bacterial infection. You end up with a cytokine storm, and white blood cell count shoots up. Your immune system is kind of in red alert, and your CRP, that's a measure of inflammation, also shoots up, and eventually the T cell count also reduces as the whole system starts to not be able to function and shut down. And it's absolutely vital that your adrenal system, which produces the adrenal hormone cortisol, that is designed to keep you alive in states of emergency, can work. And if that shuts down, the body stops fighting, and largely game over. That's the kind of, we're looking at the worst end of things. And everything described here is reversed by vitamin C, that is ascorbic acid, plus cortisol, that is exogenous from the outside adrenal hormone. Cortisone, or we usually use prednisolone, zinc, and quercetin. So I'm setting the scene. I will describe more. So the experts in sepsis, which is cytokine storm induced by a bacterial infection, usually have already identified that people in this final sepsis cytokine storm phase have scurvy. And Professor Paul Marek at East Virginia Medical School has been measuring vitamin C in COVID patients, and they are undetectable, he says. The levels are so low, they cannot be detected. So we absolutely know, apart from other benefits, when patients are absolutely and profoundly deficient in vitamin C, all of them meet the diagnostic criteria for scurvy. And just on that basis, there shouldn't be much controversy about giving vitamin C. They have a disease-induced scurvy. And by the way, when people get scurvy, vitamin C deficiency, they die of pneumonia. So it's we are really in this territory. For those who are a bit more technically minded, in his study on sepsis, while your vitamin C level should be at least 40 nanomoles per liter, he was measuring an average of 14 in this particular study. So in my book, I go through how a virus works. We just did a little bit on that. Why goats don't get colds, the truth about vitamin C and colds and flu and black elderberry and vitamin D and the winter and other antioxidants and zinc and other natural immune helpers and surviving respiratory distress, and then how to build your own immune-powered diet and supplements and the recipes that you need. So we're actually going to start with vitamin C. And vitamin C is actually made in all animals from glucose. So don't worry too much about the detail, but on the animal pathway, at the top you've got glucose, at the bottom you've got ascorbate. That is vitamin C. And in the plant pathway, plants can make it from fructose, and again it ends up as ascorbic acid. And it turns out that we lack one fully functioning enzyme, which we can call GOLO, L-glucono-E-lactone oxidase. If it wasn't for that bit that we are missing, we would be making vitamin C, which is what every other animal does. So a goat, for example, makes vitamin C from the glucose, the sugar, in the grass that it eats. And it's going to make around 13,000 milligrams a day, which is 156 lemons worth. And if you expose that goat to stress or viral attack, it's going to be making up to 100,000 grams or 1,000 lemons worth. So you're not going to be able to do what a goat does by eating lemons. And then what's really, really fascinating is if you look in the body, and remember this, that all animals, bar very few, make vitamin C. And if you look at where that vitamin C is, there's 10 times more in the immune cells, the white blood cells, than the red blood cells. But there is 100 times more in the adrenal gland. And this graph is actually showing that if you stimulate the adrenal glands, in other words, if you induce a state of stress, the adrenals actually secrete vitamin C in staggeringly large amounts into the bloodstream. And a chemical that is excreted from what we call an endocrine gland, which is what the adrenal glands are, is called a hormone. So vitamin C is actually a hormone. And the big problem is if you run out of vitamin C, you cannot get that adrenal response, and that adrenal response is essential for your life. So we don't make vitamin C. All primates don't make vitamin C. The guinea pig and capybara, these are jungle-dwelling rodents, don't make it. Most bats don't make it. The red-vented bulbul bird, another jungle-dwelling fruit-eating bird, doesn't make it. And there's a couple of Amazonian fish also that don't make it. All other animals make it. As from the very beginning of oxygen-based life, there was ascorbic acid. And we think that these animals, somewhere along their life, some version of guinea pig primate had some damage to their genes. They lost the ability to make vitamin C. It didn't kill them because they were eating a lot of fruit and vitamin C rich food. So a gorilla, for example, will eat 4 grams, 4,000 milligrams, about 80 supermarket oranges worth a day. And that would have meant they had a lot more glucose no longer being used to make vitamin C available, so they would have had more energy. So they may have become dominant, and gradually our species lost that ability. So this is what fascinated Linus Pauling. Should we be doing what animals that make vitamin C do under viral attack? He had noticed that animals that make vitamin C generally don't suffer from viruses. There are a few, but not so many. And they generally don't get cancer. So he focused on vitamin C, viruses, and cancer. That was his fundamental and fascinating question. Now, you might say, hey, hang on a second. If you say that bats don't make vitamin C, and of course, we're very interested in bats because we think they might have delivered this disease, why aren't they falling out of the sky? Now, you might say, aha, they're fruit-eating bats, so they're getting enough vitamin C. Well, that's possible. But actually, what happens is a bat is a flying mammal. And it effectively does interval training. And when it flies, its heart rate goes up to 1,000 beats a minute. And its temperature soars as well. So it does these intense periods of exercise. And that interval training seems to have helped it develop an incredibly strong respiratory and cardiovascular system, which means that, it's just a respiratory virus is like water off it should be a bat's back. So now let's, staying at the front end first, just take a look at what happens. In the UK, the average mortality in the intensive care units where the really sick people go is 41%. And for those who are put onto a ventilator, it's 49%. Now, I've been campaigning and trying to get ICUs to use vitamin C, and I've not really been at all successful. But there is one at Chelsea and Westminster in London that has been giving a gram intravenously every 12 hours, 2 grams, and they've dropped the mortality rate to 33%. I mean, that's the equivalent of saving 1 in 5 lives by doing that. The best results have actually been, why is this not working? Come on. Here we go. Yes, this is not the best result yet. We'll come on to that in a minute. I'm going to tell you about an experiment that was done in Zhongnan Hospital. Now, this was only on patients already on mechanical ventilators with a tube down their throat. And they gave 12 grams every 12 hours, 24 grams in total. They got a 24% death rate. So that's it's looking good. But the winners so far are a group of intensive care units headed by Professor Paul Marek in the US, which I'm going to tell you about. And they're using 6 grams of vitamin C, 1.5 grams every 6 hours. And this sort of having a little bit often is just as important as having a lot, just once or twice. And they're also doing a few other things as well. So that's very interesting. Another one of his colleagues in Houston, Dr. Joseph Varon, he's reported a 3.5% mortality. And they're basically saying that nobody needs to die from this disease. Number one, it's not the virus that's killing people, it's the cytokine storm. And they've got to the point now where they have no deaths in anyone who isn't both over 85 and suffering from an end-stage disease. In other words, they are going to die in the next year from emphysema or liver cirrhosis or whatever it happens to be. So, you know, if you're younger, you do not need to die with the right treatment. The big problem, of course, is we don't have the right treatment going on. So what is the right treatment? Well, what they're doing is combining three things. That is intravenous vitamin C with steroids. That's the adrenal hormone. When you are completely depleted of vitamin C, the adrenal response does not work. You have to provide vitamin C from the outside plus steroids, adrenal hormones. They use methylprednisolone from the outside. Also, you need anticoagulants because this virus causes massive clotting in the lungs. They were using that in the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, as well as the American hospitals. So this is, you know, really important. It's life-saving. And the group of doctors who are doing it right are part of a group called COVID-19criticalcare.com. So if you Google that, you can find out a lot of information. There was a very excellent film done by the Los Angeles Times in the ICUs showing exactly what they were doing. And by the way, they get virtually all of their patients do not end up on ventilators. They're not fans of ventilators. They think if you do the right thing soon enough, you don't need that. And this sort of three-pronged approach, anticoagulants, vitamin C, and steroids, is now part of the Chinese Medical Association Shanghai Protocol. In other words, all hospitals in China are being told to do this. Why not in South Africa? Why not in the UK? It's a very good question. Now, of course, some people go, oh my God, it's all terribly dangerous, injecting vitamin C and all the rest of it. Well, I'm actually showing you here the packet. When a doctor buys injectable ascorbic acid, vitamin C, you know the small print you read on the drug label? Well, this is the small print. It says there are no contraindications to the administration of ascorbic acid. It says, however, as much as 6 grams has been administered to normal adults without evidence of toxicity. Now, it is true there's a few people, there's a genetic disorder which is more common in people of African, black origin, which is called G6PD deficiency, which means you do have more problem with vitamin C. It doesn't mean in high doses, doesn't mean you can't have it, but ideally one should be checked for G6PD deficiency. Also, if you have advanced kidney problems, it could be worth checking this as well. But the chances are that short-term use up to 6 grams is not going to be a problem. Now, when this all kicked off, the Chinese had already learned from SARS that vitamin C was incredibly effective. So at their leading University of Wuhan hospital, that is the Zhongnan Hospital, they applied for and started to do a randomized placebo-controlled trial. And what they did here was in the patients in their ICU who were on ventilators, they either had a drip containing sterile water or they had a drip providing 12 grams of vitamin C. And this was done twice a day. And what they found was that 35% in the control group died and versus 24% in the vitamin C group. Now that's a third less deaths. The result is not quite statistically significant because unfortunately what happened is they ran out of patients, and that's with a TS at the end. Because what the Chinese did on the 2nd of February is they shipped 50 tons of vitamin C into Wuhan. They gave it to every hospital patient in high dose, every ICU, and also every hospital worker. And very rapidly, over the next few weeks, the incidence of people presenting to ICUs dramatically fell, and they just literally didn't have people to add to this study. So the numbers were not quite big enough. And it's a bit like when you toss a coin, heads or tails, and you get 5 heads, 3 tails, you might say, well, you know, that could be chance. Then you get 30 heads, you know, or 50 heads and 35 tails. You go, well, that's looking a little bit more like it's a real result. And then if you did it again, but you had 500 heads and 350 tails, you go, no, that's significant. And that's the problem. We call it underpowered. But they did find some very significant decreases in inflammatory markers and improved lung function in those with problems, and a significant reduction in the time needed mechanical ventilation. And I hope that that will be published in the next couple of months. Now, if you go into vitamin C, and if you hear the skeptics going, oh yes, vitamin C, you don't get less colds, you might get slightly shorter colds, they're all referring to the amazing work of Professor Harry Hemmeler, Professor of Public Health. And he has a very good paper for those of you who want to get into this called Vitamin C and Infections. We're giving you the PDF of this so you can see all the links and find all the studies. And Professor Harry Hemmeler is a Vulcan. I mean, he's an absolutely meticulous, understated, conservative researcher. If he says something, it is beyond a doubt, provably so. And all the dissing of vitamin C, if you say, well, where do you get that from? They'll all say it's from the Cochrane Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis published in 2013 by Professor Harry Hemmeler. And if you actually read that paper, you will find that when you pull all the studies together, you do not get a lesser number of colds between placebo and vitamin C. You do get a shorter duration. And on average, for all of the studies, it's 8% shorter in adults, which is about half a day, and 14% shorter in children, which is about a day. But if you actually read the meta-analysis, you find there is a dose effect. So studies giving 3 grams versus 6 grams or 4 grams versus 8 grams show that the higher doses work better. And once you're up to that sort of 6 to 8 gram a day level, you're looking at 20% decrease in cold duration, which is pretty significant. This means 1.5 to 2 days shorter colds, but also it shows that 46% of people taking 8 grams in the first day of a cold, which by the way is exactly what an animal does, it produces more vitamin C when exposed to a virus, are symptom-free after 24 hours. And what's interesting is if you actually look at the level of vitamin C that us humans have to take in to get your leukocytes, that's your white blood cell vitamin C level, up to normal, it is about 6 grams. So there's something about this magic number of 6. But I want to explain this number of colds versus duration severity by showing you the last placebo-controlled randomized trial. So we have 168 people, this was the last trial in the UK, who were given 500 milligrams of vitamin C twice a day, or placebo for 60 days over the winter season from November to January. And what happened was 50 people on the placebo got a cold versus 37. That's 26% less colds. Again, it's a little bit like the head or tail toss. Is it significant? Well, or is it a matter of chance? It could be chance, but it's heading in the right direction. And then if you go more close up and go, how many days were they actually sick? And then you find it's 178 days sick in the placebo group and 85 days of sickness in the vitamin C group. Now that's a 52% reduction. And now this isn't just chance. And then you can ask, and how many days were people effectively so sick that they couldn't go to work, with severe symptoms? And the answer, the average duration was for the placebo, they'd have, 3 days out of action, and for the vitamin C, 1.8. That's 42% less. So that's kind of the insides of when people say, yes, you don't get lesser number of colds, but they are shorter and less severe, which of course is more than enough. So Professor Harry Hemmeler, when this all broke out, started writing to the medical journals. This is his letter to the Lancet Medical Journal, saying we already know from very clear randomized placebo-controlled trials, people on vitamin C stay less time in ICUs, which is fantastic, require mechanical ventilation for a shorter period of time, which is fantastic. And he says, however, when a patient suffers from a viral infection, there may be a vitamin C dose response for up to 6 to 8 grams a day. So we should be giving 6 to 8 grams a day. The evidence for that is very strong. It's inexpensive. It's completely non-toxic. Why not? It's such a simple thing to do. And then, of course, other people will say, there's absolutely no point. You're just making expensive urine. You pee it out. And it's true that the two are not the same. I mean, you drink water and you pee it out. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't drink water. So we are designed to take things into our bloodstream. And only if they're in the bloodstream do the kidneys filter it and excrete it. That's what we're meant to do. So that's no problem with making expensive urine. The vitamin C still has something to do in between. Now, if you're not sick, and this is data from Mark Levine in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, you can see that your blood vitamin C level on the left-hand side goes up and up and up, and then it starts to slow down when you get up to about 500 milligrams. But even as you continue to 2,500 milligrams, your blood level is still increasing, but at a slower rate. And in fact, what's terribly important is you can get your blood level much higher, but you have to not, take vitamin C every hour, 2 hour, or 3 hour. But this, of course, this here right now is in healthy people. The situation is very different and not really shown in virally infected people. Now, I've been involved in some research which was only published in March, and it's in my book. And in this case, people were either given, this is the black solid line, a 10-gram gulp of ascorbic acid vitamin C, and you can see their blood level shoots up, then it falls, then it goes up again, and then it falls, then it goes up a little bit, and then it falls. And this is over a 1 hour period. So this is actually, vitamin C is an antioxidant which gets used up, protecting the body from an oxidant. I'll explain how that process works. And it can be recycled. And I think that's why we start to see this effect. Sodium ascorbate, which is another form of vitamin C, which is very good, but it's not what the body makes. It's not as pure for our chemistry as ascorbic acid. And as you can see here, it doesn't quite, raise it quite so high and doesn't quite have this cycling effect. And this cycling effect is absolutely fascinating. Here we see another experiment in the book, giving 10 grams, that's the solid line. Again, the blood level goes very, very high. And you can really see here, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. That's the recycling of vitamin C. And in this case, it's compared with sodium ascorbate given intravenously. So a lot of people will say you can't get high levels with oral vitamin C, you've got to go intravenous. And certainly you can get higher with intravenous, there's no question about that. And obviously, if someone's on a mechanical ventilator, you've got to use intravenous. But, there's some pretty good results. If you took the top points, vitamin C orally, ascorbic acid, over a 1 hour period here is doing pretty damn well. Now, some people say, you've got to have liposomal vitamin C. See, vitamin C is transported very rapidly in the stomach in an acid environment, and ascorbic acid is acidic. So that's the primary fast track route for vitamin C. And by the way, it's made from glucose. It uses the same transport system as sugar. And that's why diabetics who have messed up sugar metabolism actually have messed up vitamin C metabolism, which puts them at greater risk. The two are very closely connected, sugar and vitamin C. There's also a slow transport system, which ascorbate can make use of a bit more in a less acidic environment. And then there is a form of vitamin C called liposomal, where you basically effectively wrap it in a fat and you absorb it through a fat transport system. And you can get more in. That's the triangle here versus the white dot, which is unencapsulated, and the placebo is the black dot. So yes, you get a little bit more liposomal in, but my logic, the big problem is that if you take more vitamin C than you need, you get loose bowels. We call it bowel tolerance, to go up to, when you're sick, that is, to go up to the level that causes you loose bowels and then down some. And if for some reason you wanted to go even higher, you could at that point add in liposomal, because it will allow you to raise your blood level a bit more without loose bowels. But it's a lot more expensive. I'm not sure there's much point starting with the liposomal. So when I said that vitamin C is an antioxidant, what I mean is that when you burn food for energy, you actually release exhaust fumes, which are called free radicals or free oxidizing radicals or oxidants. And they're like a wanton bachelor looking for a mate. They lack an electron and they do all sorts of damage as they whiz around the place. That's what, when we say free iron, it's acting as a tremendous source of damage. And what the antioxidant, in this case vitamin C, does is it provides a partner. It matches that unpaired electron and stabilizes the whole process. And vitamin C has got 2 spare electrons. and also has this incredible ability once, if you like, damaged or spent, which is called dihydroascorbic acid, or DHA. It can be recycled. And one of the, I mean, really, oxidation and antioxidants, that's the hub of nutrition. And very often you hear of some new, suddenly everyone's into astaxanthin, saying it's the world's best antioxidant, or this antioxidant, or that antioxidant. And they're looking at things in a very linear way, because actually there's a whole interaction. So vitamin C, you can see here in yellow, going from the active ascorbate version to the dihydroascorbate version. On the left-hand side, there's a cycle which involves NAD. That is actually B3, or it comes from B3 niacin, and alpha lipoic acid, which helps to recycle vitamin C. On the right-hand side, you can see glutathione, which is an amino acid. There's another precursor of that called NAC, N-acetylcysteine. That hooks into glutathione reductase, which requires selenium and zinc and copper and so on. And you can see coenzyme Q and vitamin E and so on. So the bottom line, and there's also thiamine, vitamin B3, vitamin B1, which is also important. So there are all these different nutrients which are part of the process, and that's the hub of nutrition, is the nutrients do not work in isolation. They are synergistic. And that's why you have to have very good all-round nutrition, and then as required, add in something like extra vitamin C. And I'm not going to go through these studies, but for those of you who are more that way inclined, you've got the PDF and you can read them. But this is basically saying that antioxidants such as N-acetylcysteine, glutathione, resveratrol, ascorbic acid, quercetin, all of these can have an effect. So I think having a broader approach is important. And many of you in nutrition will have heard about glutathione. When we measure someone's immune strength, we often measure their red blood cell glutathione level, because it's such a critical antioxidant. So that's terribly important. This happens to be a study in relation to the herpes virus. Glutathione can be made from N-acetylcysteine. So very often if you buy an all-round antioxidant formula, you might find glutathione in it, you might find N-acetylcysteine, you might find vitamin C, zinc, selenium, alpha lipoic acid, these kind of nutrients. And in fact, the American strategy being used in the ICUs is called MATH+. M stands for methylprednisolone, that's the steroid. A for ascorbic acid. T for thiamine, B1. And the H is for heparin, which is the anticoagulant. So there's a role for thiamine as well. But it's important to know that really the high dose vitamin C is a very, very specific treatment action, while most of the rest of these are just required in an optimal amount. They're not being consumed in the same way that vitamin C is being exhumed and being expended. So in my books, I have a chart which I think still kind of says it all. When you're exposed to oxidants, which happens when you're under viral attack, or it happens when you're eating a braai with all that burnt meat, it happens when you're overburning your skin in the sun, you need this chain of antioxidants, which then get spent and then get recycled. So vitamin C can be recycled, as we saw, by lipoic acid and so on. So you need the whole lot, not just one thing. And from a point of view of food, that means eating multicolored foods, from beetroots to blueberries to carrots to mustard to turmeric to kale to broccoli. You're always going for the strong colors. And although it's not perfect, there's a reasonably good measure of the antioxidant power of a food. It's called the ORAC score, or the oxygen radical absorption capacity. And a lot of these foods like cinnamon, oregano, turmeric, mustard, strong colors, blueberries, cherries, raspberries, dark chocolate, red wine, good quality, green artichokes, asparagus, broccoli, avocados, red cabbage, red kidney beans, red lentils, green pistachios, walnuts, pecans. These have high levels of antioxidants. So they're very good. In the UK, we have this cherry concentrate called Cherry Active, and one shot of that has the same ORAC score of 100 carats, or 103 carats. So that's excellent. So then we come on to vitamin D. Now, vitamin D, a bit like vitamin C as a hormone, vitamin D is a hormone, and it's primarily made in the skin. Yes, you can eat some in oily fish and eggs and a little bit of milk, but really our production is in the skin. And what happens, we all know, and I know your season is different to mine, so we know in the UK, and this is American data, that people get flu between November and March. They don't get it in August and July. And vitamin D levels in our part of the world, latitude 48 degrees north, when you're away from the equator, starts to decline quite dramatically from October all the way through to March, April, because we just do not have enough angle of sunlight to get enough. And when you look at the peak flu season with December, January, February, March being very, very key, and of course the same thing is true in Wuhan. And when you put the flu season over the vitamin D levels, there is another factor as well, which is temperature, humidity, and UV exposure. If you want to get sick from flu, the best place to live is somewhere far north or south of the equator that is also wet and cold, high humidity, low temperature, insufficient angle of sun to make vitamin D. That's the flu zone. I live in it. Now, I remember just last week looking at some data out of Oxford, which had predicted massive deaths from COVID in Africa. And yet, if you go to the equatorial regions, I was looking at the data on Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Uganda, nice and equatorial, very, very few deaths. Why? Well, there's a very good chance it's because people live outdoors a lot and they are making vitamin D. You make vitamin D, by the way, in the first 20 minutes of sun exposure. So it's quite a good argument to not put your sunscreen on for 20 minutes. Make your vitamin C every day. And you might think you live in a hot country, but you won't make it through glass in your car and your shopping mall and your house. You actually have to roll up your sleeves, put on a t-shirt, take off your t-shirt. Expose a decent amount of your skin to vitamin D. And there are more and more studies coming out. This is one of the most recent ones. Vitamin D supplementation could reduce risk of influenza and COVID infections and deaths. Well worth reading. This is a survey from the US, and I'll just interpret this for you. Those with a high level of vitamin D, you want to get your blood level of vitamin D above 75 nanomoles per liter. That's how we talk about it in England. In America, they call it 30 nanograms per mil. And what this is showing is that 96% of those who had a mild case of COVID-19 had high vitamin D, while on the other hand, those who had a critical case of COVID-19, only 4% had a high level of vitamin D, and 52% had an extremely low deficient level below 50 nanomoles per liter. So that association is well established, and there are more and more studies coming out. For example, the Lancet, do deficient risk have a problem? But there aren't yet many clinical trials where people have specifically been given vitamin D and got better, not in the way they have with vitamin C, but there are two here. And they're quite interesting. Often, if you're into vitamin D, you hear about people taking 1,000 IUs a day. And by the way, vitamin D stores, so you could easily take 7,000 IUs once a week. It would have the same effect. Here we have two studies of people who, 30 people who are mechanically ventilated, critically ill people at risk of death, who were actually given not 1,000 IUs, not 5,000 IUs, not 50,000 IUs, but 500,000 IUs, 1,000 IUs a day over 5 days. And it massively increased their blood level up to what would be normal levels because they were deficient, and it worked. It really helped to save lives. In another study, again, they gave 100,000 IUs of vitamin D for 5 days, And the hospital length of stay was reduced from 36 days in the control group to 25 days in the lower dose vitamin D group, and 18 days in those taking over 5 days, 500,000 IU. So, you know, that's a halving of days in hospital, which is a pretty strong measure. And what happened, those in the lower dose group had healthy blood levels 112 nanomoles per liter by the end, and those with a higher dose 137 nanomoles per liter. I was saying you want to get above 75. It may be above 100 nanomoles per liter is what gives you the best protection overall. You don't, I think, need to be taking vitamin D every day like you do vitamin C when you're fighting a virus. You just should always have sufficient high blood level. Every immune cell have receptors for vitamin D called vitamin D receptors. So it's not like vitamin C where you need it every hour because it's being consumed and spent. You just need to have enough vitamin D. And if you don't, there's no harm in having a very high dose short term, just for a few days, to get your blood level up to around 100 nanomoles per liter. That is worth doing. Zinc is the next.
Patrick?
Yes.
Sorry, quick question from Debbie. Do you
Yes.
think the vitamin D situation might be a reason for the low death rates in the South African townships because they're outside more often?
I'm sure, absolutely. I have no doubt. I think that that's a terribly important factor. Being outdoors, exposing your skin, getting sun exposure is absolutely vital. You know, here in the UK where we don't have much sun anyway, and we're all told to lock down, and for us that means, you know, living indoors and not getting outside, we literally have no ability to make vitamin D. So I do think that we are designed to be naked, living outdoors a lot further, you know, south in London. So I'm sure that that is a factor. I think at the moment, the what we call the association evidence is very, very strong. The study evidence is not quite so strong. So even if you find that people with high vitamin D in their blood have lower, you know, rates of COVID deaths, you've proven association. You haven't yet proved cause. You know, that's the sticking point in terms of the science, but I'm sure that's absolutely vital. Good question.
It's another question. Why are some people allergic to the tablet form of vitamin D? Any ideas?
I didn't know that that was the case. I've not actually encountered that. I mean, there has to be something in the tablet, you know, and vitamin D is, you know, is naturally an oil, so you can get little, you know, you can get droppers of it. So it's got to be something in it. I mean, you can't really be allergic to ascorbic acid, you know, vitamin C, and you can't really be allergic to vitamin D. Your body makes vitamin D. It'd be like being allergic to your own cholesterol. And by the way, vitamin D is made from cholesterol. So things like statin drugs could interfere with the ability to make vitamin D. So I don't know. It has to be something else in the tablet. Can't be the vitamin D. Okay, shall I roll on a bit? Oh, gone quiet there. Okay,
yep.
I'm going to keep.
I'll
keep rolling, and we're getting sort of towards the end, so we have some good questions. So zinc also is vital. It's vital for your immune cell function. It's antiviral, very specifically. And you want to get zinc inside your cells. It needs a bit of help getting inside your cells. The malaria drug, hydroxychloroquine, actually, the reason it works, even though it's got quite a lot of bad side effects, is that it drives zinc into cells, but so does the nutrient quercetin, which is very rich in red onions. So I love quercetin with zinc. And it does, in high dose, it does reduce duration of colds. What I mean by that is I want to take in every day 10 to 15 milligrams of zinc. That's what I get in my multivitamin, plus the seeds and fish. Anything you plant in the ground that grows has got zinc in it. And anything that, you know, any animal, meat, fish, egg obviously is like a seed, very rich in zinc. So you want those foods, but I think you also want to supplement at least 10 milligrams every day. But it's only really when you get up to above 50, 60 milligrams during a day that you get a very specific reduction in cold duration. And this study of studies by Professor Harry Hemmeler says 33% reduction. The way I do that is I've got a vitamin C that has zinc in it, So when I'm greatly upping my vitamin C, I'm also greatly upping my zinc. Some people use zinc lozenges. They might have 6 throughout the day to get that level high. So zinc works. Quercetin, I mentioned earlier, very rich in red onions. I like to eat one every day. But again, you'd need more than that to have a significant effect to drive zinc into infected cells. So those American ICUs are actually using and recommending quercetin plus zinc to their patients as part of the process. And there's a lot of good research on quercetin. Again, for the nutritionists out there want to study it, this is a very useful paper explaining how quercetin reduces inflammation and supports healthy immunity. Black elderberry. Right now, it's, I tell you, every year I mean to make elderberry juice and jam and crumbles and whatever in my garden, but I don't have a chance. The pigeons descend, as they are doing right now as I speak, on my elderberry bushes. In the country, there are less pigeons, more elderberry bushes. I've got a chance, but here in London, very few elderberries, lots of pigeons. And when I go into my garden, they fly away as if they're doing something naughty. Anyway, I've decided the pigeons get the black elderberries. In some countries, they know that the cure in Wales, they say when you're sick, you eat elderberry juice. And we know that elderberries also inhibit viruses. There's some question about not using them in a cytokine storm phase, but certainly in the early stages of a flu, there are 2 good studies that show that they work. So you can buy elderberry extract from the health food stores. So in summary, what we want, if you had a perfect drug, it would optimize those T cells, it would optimize those macrophages that gobble up viruses, increase interferon, block the spikes on viruses so they can't get in and out of your cells, stop the virus replicating, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that is what vitamin C, zinc, vitamin D, vitamin A, selenium, glutathione, shiitake mushrooms, aged garlic, quercetin, ginger, all of these coenzyme Q, I go into a lot more in the book. And what we'd want as a consequence of all these cellular actions functioning well is less colds and flu, respiratory infections. We know vitamin C does that. We know vitamin D does that. We know vitamin E, vitamin A does that. We want shorter colds and flu. Vitamin C does that, elderberry does it, zinc does it, aged garlic does it, and we want less severe symptoms. So, the logic is there, the mechanism is there, the studies are there, and what isn't there is the education, and that really is the purpose of the book. So in the book, I do start to list all the, by the way, I will show you this. This is a product in the UK, you don't have it here. It's my vitamin C powder. But it gives half ascorbic acid because I like ascorbic acid. And then the ascorbates are always attached to a mineral. And I want magnesium, I want zinc, I want manganese. I don't want too much calcium. So I want some black elderberry and some ginger and bilberry. So this is a product you can't get in South Africa. But when you're looking for a vitamin C powder, you can just buy pure, cheap, absolutely fine ascorbic acid. If you have a blend that's also giving you some zinc, magnesium, and perhaps mixture of ascorbic acid, ascorbates, that's not bad too. So there's a list in the book of all the sorts of foods, brightly colored, that we want to have as part of our immune power foods. There are a lot more of these foods in South Africa. I don't know, what the traditional diet would include, but any of your more sort of tropical fruits will be stronger in color, will provide more of these nutrients. There's a tremendously good chance that a natural South African would get more of these foods than someone living in the UK. A few hot tips from the book, the old ginger, lemon, and honey. It's very, very nice. And when you get sick and you don't feel like doing anything, you inevitably have run out of ginger, don't have a lemon to hand, and so on. So what I do, I've got a juicer. But even if you don't have a juicer, but you've got a friend who has a juicer, go around with a mountain of ginger, make a big jug of ginger juice, go home, pour it into ice cube trays. Do the same thing with lemon or lime juice. And then when you are sick, you can get your vitamin C powder. It's not destroyed by heat. make some hot water, pop in a ginger ice cube, a lime ice cube, maybe a little bit of some berry concentrate. That would be fantastic. Or get a watermelon with the seeds, not seedless, but seeded, and blend it with the seeds. That's got so many fantastic antioxidants. So there are little tips in the book of how to, do this very easily. Also, what happens is on flufighters.net, you'll find the references are in the book, but you can click on a downloadable list of references where you can click on every study. There's 160 pages, there's 160 references, and you can also find on our website the Math Plus protocol of Professor Paul Marek. We've got podcasts with Harry Hemmeler, with Marek, with other people. So you can really absorb this information and share it with as many people as possible. In the UK, we've started a campaign at change.org, Vitamin C for UK. That is Linus Pauling there. And maybe you guys will start a Vitamin C for ZA. That would be really fantastic. So that's kind of what I wanted to say. So let me get out of there, stop sharing, and then you can see me. I can answer your questions. There you go, Ian.
Thank you, Patrick. That was a whirlwind tour of the immunity. But I hope you can all see how important base nutrition is. The nutrients we know are essential to the body, but we tend to put them down just as maybe supplements. So food and supplements can keep us healthy. So talking about supplements, that's the base of our first question from Lauren.
Yeah, I can see Lauren's question. There's a sort of slight concern about undesirable things in supplements. The first thing I want to clear up, by the way, is that cheap ascorbic acid is vitamin C. It is what every animal makes. It is what every plant makes. There's nothing wrong with it. So even though it might look like, it's a white powder, you think it's sort of synthetic, it is synthetic. It's made in a lab from glucose, like animals make vitamin C in a lab. So there's no problem with pure ascorbic acid powder. I think your concern is, you say, I bought some ascorbic acid to sprinkle on a food. Absolutely fine. Go for it. No problem at all. Yes, better supplements don't use nasty preservatives, colorings, flavors, and all the rest of it. So sometimes you just have to shop around a little bit and look at the small print. But I wouldn't be so concerned. The most important thing is to get the nutrients inside your body. Where should we go to next, Ian? Yeah, is there any problem in a person with cardiovascular disease consuming vitamin D? Absolutely not. It's great. Vitamin D reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease. It's not a problem. The most important thing is to test your vitamin D level because that's the only way you can really know. I tested myself at the end of February, having spent a month in Kenya in lovely sunshine, supplementing about 800 IUs, 600 IUs a day, which is what I normally take, expecting to find me at least above 75, if not 100 IUs. Of course, I had come out of the British winter, and I was just under 70. So I go, wow, even supplementing 600 or 800 IUs a day and having had a month in a hot, sunny, equatorial place, I still hadn't got my vitamin D level up quite high enough. So if you can't access a test, my advice, especially at a time like this when we all are potentially exposed to a virus, I would take 1,000 IUs a day. Just whack it in there. And remember, because it stores, you could do 7,000 once a week. You don't have to do it every day with vitamin D.
Okay, from Genevieve, as vitamin C is a water-soluble vitamin, does that mean we don't need to take it with food? We just need to drink our tablet with a full glass of water? And what are the tips for ensuring best absorption of these vitamins?
You don't need to take vitamin C with food. Its primary direct absorption method is it's an acid, ascorbic acid, while ascorbate, which is vitamin C attached to a mineral, an alkaline mineral, is less acidic. And vitamin C is absorbed better in an acidic environment. And the stomach is an acidic environment. So normally if you take vitamin C, enters the stomach, it's absorbed. If you took it with food you're making more stomach acid, it's absorbed as well. The only situation where it may not be absorbed quite so well is if you have a lack of stomach acid. So, people who are taking these PPI drugs, meprazole, the antacid drugs, that's more likely to interfere. Sometimes people don't like ascorbic acid. This occasionally occurs because they think it gives them digestive problems. And this may actually be very simply because they are not absorbing it, because they have a lack of stomach acid. So one simple thing you can do to increase its absorption in that case would be either to have it with a little bit of cider vinegar, diluted in water, for example, a dessert spoon or tablespoon of cider vinegar in some water, which would make an acidic environment for it, which will enhance its absorption. Or possibly have it with some citrus juice, like a little bit of orange juice, because it's interesting that nature puts the most vitamin C into citric fruits, which are acidic. So actually, it's an acid environment that helps better. By the way, I see a question here about kidney stones. Isn't it a problem with kidney stones? Most of the story about kidney stones is a myth created by a bad experiment or a series of bad experiments. What they did was they gave vitamin C to people, collected their urine, and then they were looking for high levels of oxalic acid or uric acid, and they found it in some studies. But what they didn't realize was that when you do a study like that, vitamin C is so biologically active that it very rapidly acts as an antioxidant and ends up as an oxidized version. So Ewer et al., who are from the Cape Town Kidney Specialist Nephrology Unit, did the same experiment, but they added a preservative the second they collected the urine, so that you wouldn't get the formation of this oxalic acid actually in the test tube, so to speak. And they found there was no effect at 5 grams. At 5 grams. So remember, we were saying 6 grams a magical number. We're only talking for a small number of days. The guys in American ICUs have had not a single problem with kidney stones. So I really would not be concerned with kidney stones taking 2 grams every day, which is what I do, or taking a higher dose just during a viral infection, which is what I do. I would be concerned, and if you were taking very high doses and you already had kidney function problem. So then your doctor should, observe that. But I think generally speaking, it's not a problem. In the same way that we do not see animals that make vitamin C walking around with kidney stones. It's part of our natural metabolism.
Okay, there's a question on celery juice. Have you got an opinion? That seems to be the new phase.
Well, yes, it certainly does. And I think I was reading somewhere that celery is one of the foods that has negative calories. In other words, you expend more calories chewing celery than you get from celery. Without mentioning names, I've got a few people here who are having celery juice to help them be regular. They're having problems with constipation, and for some it's worked and for some it hasn't. Celery's got some good properties. I'm not against that. And some people are kind of doing an 18-6 type diet where you don't eat for 18 hours. You have dinner at 7, lunch at 1, and starting their day with celery juice. I don't really mind, too much about that. It doesn't excite me massively. I don't think it's going to, give you tons of vitamin C. I don't think it's an alternative. I don't think it is a panacea, but I don't have a problem if you want to, play around with that. I think it's very good to experiment in nutrition, and find out what works for you, really. Yes, I see there's, I'm a type 1 diabetic, sugars well controlled, 4.9, HbA1c, currently 27 weeks pregnant. Congratulations, Lynette. Are all the mentioned vitamins, supplements safe for me to use in pregnancy? And the answer is yes. And also, I would really encourage you to read, not necessarily do right now, but read my new book, The 5-Day Diet, because there is a whole new area of science called fasting mimicking diet, where you can switch on a repair process that happens in fasting, but you can do it without fasting. That's why it's called fasting mimicking diet. You have to do it for 5 days. And in animals, doing this 5-day diet 4 times has reversed type 1 diabetes. In other words, the animals are making insulin again. And this is a fact. And there's human study going on right now. And I had one type 1 diabetic just recently, a few weeks ago, who is a doctor, who's done my 5-day diet, has a pump, which pumps in the amount of insulin, that she needs. And the pump switched off. She got to the point where she actually stopped needing insulin. Now, I'm not making any claims there, and nor is she, but I'm fascinated in type 1 diabetics doing this 5-day process, perhaps not now when you're pregnant, but afterwards, and doing it 4 times and seeing what happens. But of course, you have to be controlling I've got a book called Say No to Diabetes, and everything that works for type 2 works for type 1 as well. But you have to be careful with type 1 because it works so damn well. Your insulin dose can change rapidly. So it's very important when you start to play around with nutrition and you're a type 1 diabetic that you are, controlling your blood sugars, adjusting your insulin dose accordingly, because you may find, one guy did this and he dropped his insulin requirement by 75%, doing the Say No to Diabetes diet, which is a low GL diet.
And then there was a question about quantities for pregnancy.
Yeah, well, you'll find a lot of supplements say don't take in pregnancy if you're breastfeeding or whatever, and it's kind of it's a catch-all thing that's put there, and it's usually also because there just haven't been studies necessarily done in pregnancy. But I really wouldn't be concerned, because what happens if you take more vitamin C than you need? You get loose bowels. It's as simple as that. So your body already has a mechanism for telling you when you're taking in more than you need. It is one of the things that really got Linus Pauling interested. If you drink 10 liters of water, in a few minutes, like, half an hour or 15 minutes, you can kill yourself. So, 2 liters of water is good. 10 liters of water in a short period of time can actually kill you. That's water. And there's no warning on the label, don't drink too much water when you're pregnant. Now, what Linus Pauling said, 10 milligrams of vitamin C can prevent scurvy, 10 milligrams. But 100,000 milligrams of vitamin C is not toxic. So we are talking about the least toxic substance known to man that already tells you if you're having too much because you get loose bowels. That is an essential part of your whole body's chemistry that every single animal, except for the primates and the guinea pigs and the bats, makes during pregnancy in large amounts. So I really wouldn't be concerned. Actually, I'll tell you one funny thing. I went on to Bill Gates' vaccine blog, private blog, just to sniff around and see what they were saying. And one lady said to me, he said that high doses of vitamin C interfere with the contraceptive pill. And she said, Holford, you're going to have a lot of unwanted lockdown babies on your conscience. And I said to her, Madam, first of all, could you please state your source? It's a very interesting idea. And secondly, I might suggest that when you're fighting a life-threatening viral infection, you might want to abstain from sex. But I don't think vitamin C is going to harm anyone. And that's my honest truth.
Okay. Donna's just asked about large amounts transferring to the fetus. So yeah, I think you've already answered that, haven't you?
I think it could be beneficial. It's not going to be harmful.
Yeah, I think to round up what Patrick said, all of these nutrients are essential to our bodily function. That's why they're called essential vitamins and essential minerals. So we need them in a certain amount. But because of our modern day diets, because of our toxicity and stress levels, we're not getting enough, mostly, unless we go and live in an organic farm and eat straight off the ground. That might make a difference. But then toxicity levels and stress deplete the levels that we need. So we're actually needing more vitamin C, more selenium, more zinc, etc., to buffer any stresses that might be in our day-to-day existence. So it's about trying to balance it and provide enough that we maintain health for ourselves. And that's very much, there's no perfect amounts or perfect cures for anything. It's about learning about ourselves, isn't it, Patrick? It's a sort of lifelong journey.
All of that is totally true. But even if you, lived like a caveman in the jungle, like a gorilla, eating a lot of vitamin C and super fit, whole foods and organic and all the rest of it, still, we have lost the ability to make vitamin C. And that is different. It's different to the story about B vitamins, zinc, magnesium, or anything else. We have lost the ability to make vitamin C. And at every single human, therefore, is at greater risk of viral disease. It's as simple as that. And it's that quirk of our evolutionary journey that makes this short-term high-dose use of vitamin C during a viral infection so important. And that's not because you're not eating a good diet. It's not because you're not eating organic. It's simply because you are human. And what I'm very interested in, I'll tell you this just as a teaser, we actually have found out that enzyme, the last bit, the GOLO enzyme, is not lacking. We do have the enzyme, but it doesn't work. And it turns out it's a bit like there are these things in genes called codons, where you go to read a gene to make the enzyme, and it's like having a full stop in the wrong place in a bit of computer code. The codons stop the reading. The gene is there to make the enzyme, but it's not being read. So there's some very fascinating research going on right now as to whether it might actually be possible to unblock the gene message and restore our ability to make vitamin C. But vitamin C is an exception. That's why Linus Pauling, the greatest chemist of all time, focused 39 years of his life on vitamin C, human health, viral diseases, and cancer. So however well you eat, which is absolutely critical, you can never get enough vitamin C to fight a strong virus just by eating food. You have to have more.
So can you finish up, Patrick, by just saying, what would you recommend on average as a daily vitamin C dose? Mm-hmm. And what do you drive it up to during a virus?
Yeah, well, when Linus Pauling, did his research, he was really campaigning to get the RDA, which we call it the ridiculous dietary arbitrary, but the recommended daily allowance at 2 grams, 1 gram twice a day. That's where he wanted it to be. On the basis, and if you look at animal work, it's about that level. So there are no animals, body weight equivalent who are producing less than that. So that's what I do. I take 1 gram of vitamin C twice a day. It's water soluble. It's in and out within 5 to 6 hours. So there's no point taking 2 grams in the morning. You want to take 1 gram twice a day. I would say that is optimal. If you're very, very, very conservative in terms of the science, there is absolutely no question that 500 milligrams, half a gram, gives you protection against not just viruses, but cardiovascular disease, other diseases. So, if you were a really, button-nosed scientist, you would be taking at least 500 milligrams a day. I asked Professor Paul Marek at the East Virginia Medical School, and also Dr. Marcella Vizcachipi at the Chelsea and Westminster ICU unit. What do you take? And that's what they take, 1 gram twice a day. And when they get a cold, they're going to, triple at least that amount of vitamin C. So most people who know about vitamin C are taking at least 1 gram a day, probably 1 gram twice a day. I'm not taking more, just because I'm at risk. But I have learned that the very second that I get the first signs of a sniffle, snuffle, aches, sore throat, blocked nose, straight away, I go to 1 gram an hour. And it's very simple. You could take 2 grams every 2 hours. If you get loose bowels, and maybe you don't need so much, you take a bit less. But generally, you do not get loose bowels when you're fighting an infection. It's extraordinary how much you can take. And what I do is I keep taking it until I forget. And why do I forget? I forget because the symptoms have gone. I had what I think, was this coronavirus about a month ago. It certainly was a very, very strong flu. And it kind of hit me out of nowhere, and I had soaring temperature, didn't feel at all good. I did exactly what I'm describing here, and it broke at 18 hours. And it's usually like that. What happens is finally there's like cold sweat, wham, I'm in the clear. I know it, but my whole system calms down. So I'm 62 years old now. I've been doing this since I was 25, and I have maybe 3 times in my life suffered from a flu that has gone on more than 24, perhaps maximum 36 hours. So if you get in early and high enough, the very, very good chance is you can get over any viral infection within the first 48 hours. If you wait and you deliberate and you go, I'm not sure, maybe that's too much, etc. If you do it 2 days later and too low dose, you can't. So the real trick is to get in hard and fast. And by the way, vaccines are less effective in older people with weak immune systems. So everything you're doing now would make any vaccine more effective. And the whole point of a vaccine is to introduce the learning of a specific antibodies against a specific virus. So what you're trying to do is get your immune system, up to kind of like Formula One standard. So the minute you're exposed to a virus, your whole immune system can respond very, very fast. And then it's game over for the virus. I think that's the way to go.
Thank you, Patrick.
Pleasure.
Where do we buy your book?
Hopefully anywhere. Exclusive books, CNA, or I think all your, what's it called? It always sounds like Camelot, get a lot, spend a lot, take a lot. Yeah, it'll be there. And yeah, so it shouldn't be hard to find online. If you're a Kindle reader, you can get it on Kindle. If you're an Audible, you want the Audible audio version, you can get it on Audible. But you should be able to, any bookstore has access to it. So support your local book. Maybe you're not allowed out. Maybe they're not open. But if they are, do. And if not, go online. Take a lot would be an example of a place that you can get it. And by the way, you might have heard about the R number. There's a lot of talk about the R number, that if one person infects 2 people, we've got a problem. That's an R number of 2. So the idea is lockdown ends when you get the R number down to 1 or less. Otherwise, you get multiplication. I want to get the R number above 2 for this information. So in other words, if you get 1 book and then give it to someone else, or even better, buy 2 books and give them both when you finish reading it, to someone else, and they read it and they pass it on like a chain letter, we may solve this problem with what we call herd immunity. What I mean by that is I don't think it's the medical profession that's going to change this. I don't think it's the government policy that's going to change this. I think when we get a significant portion of the population, maybe half the population, knowing just instinctively, when I get a cold, I take more vitamin C. When that's just part of our culture, I think then we'll get a change in policy. In China, they did it already. They mandated, take vitamin C. But I think that in our culture, we've got to spread the word. So please do get the book. Please do pass it on. I think that this is, and by the way, I'll just end with one thing. We had 14 viral epidemics in the 18th and 19th century that killed in the thousands of people. We've had 11 this century. In 20 years, we've had 11. None of them have been solved by a vaccine. Not because I'm anti-vaccine, but you can't develop a vaccine until something has struck and you study it and you find out what it is. The Ebola vaccine is almost there now, but we're talking many years later. So as well as all that vaccine stuff, it's terribly important to do what you can do for any viral disease. And I guarantee in our lifetime, we're going to have more of these. It's not like a one-off. We will have more viral epidemics. To do what you can do yourself anyway, and that is learn how to strengthen and support your own immune system. And the lovely thing is that, things like vitamin C, zinc, etc., they work against any virus, not just this virus. So that's really critical. And it may be that the really important answer is not some magic drug that may or may not happen, or a magic vaccine that may or may not happen, but the magic of your own innate, highly intelligent, natural immunity, if given the chance to do its job properly, which means optimum nutrition. Thank you, Ian, for having me.
Well finished. That was really nice. Thank you. Thank you, Patrick.
So stay well, everyone, and please spread